Thank you very much, Ray. Welcome, everybody. What I want to talk to you about today is the digital shopper. But I'm not going to talk about digital research per se. What I want to talk about is the digital consumer, and really picking up on some of the themes that have been mentioned throughout some of today's excellent presentations already. And that's that while there are some amazing innovations being made in research today, we need to make sure that the change and developments are driven not by innovation for innovation's sake, but by consumer behavior, changes in consumer behavior, and particularly what that means in terms of research buyers, stakeholder objectives, and what it means for the business. David Penn, who gave an excellent presentation this morning talking about neuroscience and neuromania, was talking about how single solutions to explain complex behaviors are doomed to fail, which I think feeds nicely into what I'm going to talk about today. But in fact, one of our young researchers, I think it was Kate Gibb, who was talking about what she's learnt in research, and really discussed the importance of thinking about the end game on what we're going to do as researchers, and what clients and businesses are going to do with research results when we design our research solutions. And that's really my message today about the digital shopper. It's all around developing multi-channel research approaches to understand and follow multi-channel consumer behavior to help clients, retailers or product brands develop multi-channel retail strategies. So what I'm going to do is firstly talk a little about, well, who is a digital shopper, and bring that person to life for you. Then we'll look at it from the business point of view. What are the implications for retail, whether it's retailers themselves or product brands? And then finally, think about what are the implications for researchers and the implications for the way that we need to work. Okay, so who is a digital shopper? Well, if we think about this literally, then perhaps one consideration is that the digital shopper is somebody who shops with their fingers as well as their feet. Certainly that's what the word digital would suggest. So perhaps here we're talking about people who are using new digital technologies, whether we're talking about the computer, the smartphone, or even the emerging tablet category, to buy things online. Well, that's certainly part of the story, but it's certainly not the whole story. Okay, slide's not just moving on. So what we're talking about here is not digital shopper as just being living in a digital world. In fact, none of us live in a digital-only world. The digital shopper is, in fact, a savvy consumer who uses all the channels available to them. We're talking about the physical retail store, we're talking about online, we're talking about mobile, we're talking about who knows what that's coming next in terms of technological development. And they use these channels to either maximize something they value, which could be the retail experience itself, or minimize something that they lack. That could be time, that could be money. So I am a market researcher, so excuse me one slide with some percentages on it, but I just really wanted to put this in context for you. As I said, it's a multi-channel world that we live in. We all still use retail stores. A recent survey we did showed 98% of UK consumers had bought something at a store in the last 3 months. Either there's the usual significant error in that, or there's 2% of hermits living in the UK who never make it to a shop. Perhaps that's true. But the physical store is still really important. It provides that convenient, local, safe environment to shop. But much more than that, it provides the much needed social and experiential element, whether we're talking about interacting with friends and families on a shopping trip or interacting with products themselves. We all like to still feel the fit of those new Levi's when we pull them on, or the clunk click of the Volkswagen door as we slam it shut. Online or e-commerce is certainly nothing new. Our survey showed 16% of consumers made an online purchase in the last 3 months, and I think certainly that's not a million miles away from the percentage of retail sales globally that are done online. A relatively small percentage compared to stores, but when you multiply that up on a global scale and turn it into dollars, you're talking about a pretty big number, and this is a big business these days. And that brings me on to mobile. Mobile is new and it's growing. 3% of consumers we spoke to had made a purchase using a mobile phone. But this is growing rapidly, and interestingly enough, it's growing faster than online. Online sales growing at something like 10% double-digit growth. Mobile commerce or mobile-based retail is predicted to double at least over the next 3 years, driven partly by technology adoption, the number of us walking around with iPhones and Android phones in our pockets now, but also behavioral change, the change in the way consumers use these devices, which is then leading in turn to the services and platforms that retailers and brands are providing. Okay, so that's who the digital shopper is. What does this mean then for the world of retail? I like to think about this in 4 categories really. Firstly, e-commerce. It's nothing new, we all know about it. But as we saw, it's big business, $680 billion worldwide. And we see 2 things happening at the moment in e-commerce. We see developments at either end of the scale. At one end, we see value-driven propositions with price comparison sites and brands like Groupon and Quidco using location-based and group-based discounts to drive consumers towards purchase of particular brands and products. And at the other end, we see brands like the example of Nike here on the slide, who really use the e-commerce platforms as a direct extension of that brand experience that you get within their flagship stores. But we're also starting to see something I like to call F-commerce. And this is really retailers and brands playing on and leveraging the direct consumer connections they're making through social media. It's consumers that are really adopting this and driving it, and the brands are starting to play catch-up. And here we see the social influences of peer review and recommendations really driving consumers at that awareness and recognition stage. And now we see brands adopting this, and whether we're talking about driving direct sales by Facebook-based retail platforms like companies like ASOS, the online retailer, clothing retailer, or indirectly driving people to offline and real-world purchase through sales and promotions and viral deals. But perhaps most interestingly is m-commerce. As we saw, it's still relatively small but growing rapidly. And this is where we see the digital experience of retail both support and replace the physical retail experience. The mobile phone, the smartphone are really empowering consumers to take the flexibility and the power of online retail into the physical retail store. Whether we're talking about providing information about products or the store itself, driving people to particular locations through group offers, getting information within the store using barcode and QR code scanners to either check prices and find value, or get product information, or even peer-to-peer reviews through social media. We even see people buying via mobile phones, both from their home. We see this example on the slide here of the Domino Pizza app, where you can order your pizza from the comfort of your home for delivery, or even Pizza Express, where you can use your mobile to order while in the store and restaurant environment itself. But it's also about engaging with consumers at retail, collecting reward points, getting cash back, or even, and something we're going to see growth of a lot in the next year or so, is actually paying, and not just paying remotely through people like PayPal, but paying in stores, with Google launching Google Checkout via their smartphone devices imminently. So what then is the role of the store going forward then, as we see this merging of the online and the offline worlds? Well, that brings me on to the 4th area, which I like to call v-commerce or virtual commerce. And this is where we really see the merging of bricks and clicks, the digital world and the store world truly merging. Whether we're talking about interactive point-of-sale materials, like the iPad-driven Absolute Vodka display we see here in the bottom left, where consumers can get product information and direct advertising about the product in the retail store. Or even using virtual augmented reality tools where consumers can hold mobile phones over physical products and overlay digital information and digital content. But the flip side of that is the retailers actually taking the store out to the digital consumer. And we see 2 examples here on the right. At the top is actually Tesco's, or the Tesco supermarket brand in South Korea. and in the bottom right, a UK-based online grocery retailer, Ocado. And in both instances, they created virtual stores or virtual billboards and displays out in the real world. In Korea, it was in a subway station, and in Ocado, it was in central London around St Paul's. And in both instances, the consumers were able to browse the products in this virtual but real environment, scan products they wanted to buy using their mobile device, and purchase for delivery at home later. So what we see here is effectively a seamless cross-channel retail experience. And really this is at the heart of what consumer behavior is driving retailers to adopt. So these are the challenges then really from the retail side of things, that single multi-channel retail strategies are being demanded because this is where consumer behavior is going. But this is easier said than done when many retail brands and product brands have separate departments not working necessarily seamlessly together, developing the store channel, the online channel, and perhaps even mobile. And as we move towards this multi-channel retail environment, what is the role of that physical retail store? If it's not so much about selling anymore, what is the role of that space, and how can we justify the expense? And thirdly, the relationship between brands and retailers themselves. As product brands look to retailers to bring their product to life in the physical world and be the human face of their brand, how do they work with retailers when they're delivering their own retail strategies through social media and mobile? Okay, so what does this mean then for research then? What does this mean for us and the way that we observe and analyze and interpret this behavior? Well, it's my belief that the shopper journey, as we traditionally look at it itself, hasn't really changed. We all still need to go through the same steps to achieve a purchase, all the way through from generation of a need, awareness of available products and brands, researching and selecting our products, validating our chosen purchase, and actually going through the transaction and consumption stages. But what has changed is firstly the speed with which we can navigate this journey. Secondly, the path we take to get from A to B. And third, the channels that we use on our journey. And this means what we're facing is a non-linear multi-channel journey, where consumers move seamlessly between channels as they go from step to step, and perhaps back and forward in the process. And in fact, we see from the examples I've shown you, multiple channels being used at each stage. So this means we're faced with very, very complex behavior, and behavior that changes perhaps by market, certainly by category, and definitely by individual consumer types. Just some of the examples that I show on this slide for you here, whether we're talking about peer influence via social media at the need and awareness stage, consumers using mobile products, mobile devices, as I said, to research at the point of sale, to be looking at products in a retail store and getting price comparisons and product information, maybe from friends and family, but also from other retailers and other brands, something people are starting to call digital shoplifting. Taking a customer from a competitive retailer virtually through a digital environment into your store or your online platform. Whether it's a selection stage, what is the role of the store if people are doing this at the shelves and at the till? We know that sort of 50% of product selections are still made in the store. So what's the role of the salesperson? Are they more of an advisor, more of an educator, as we see in Apple stores, certainly, with their Genius Bar? But also at the transactional stage, where we see people using multiple channels, whether it's buying online to pick up in a physical retail store with many multi-category supermarket and department store retailers. Or conversely, we see Amazon, an online retailer who's now looking to provide physical pickup points in city centres to provide that real-world delivery mechanism. So I'm afraid if you're looking for me to tell you the silver bullet here, that the single research solution to understand multi-channel retail, I'm afraid there isn't one, which is exactly my point. But however, there are 6 facets to multi-channel research that I'd like to cover. And firstly, that's ensuring that any research following the digital shopper in this type of world needs to be consumer-centric and developed around consumer behavior. We need to ensure that the research follows the consumer where they go. We don't force the consumer to follow the research. We need to be flexible and adaptable, both in the mode of research we use and in time frame, allowing us to understand the consumer's behavior in the real context. We need to blend new MR and old MR. We need to ensure that we use all the tools in our research kit and use the one that's most relevant for to understand that consumer behavior at that part of the journey in a particular channel. And that means using a multi-channel approach, much as the retailers are doing, using face-to-face research, online research, digital research, and mobile-based research. And when we talk about digital, we need to be device agnostic and let the consumer, the respondent in the research perspective, use the most relevant medium for them, whether that's a PC, a tablet, a phone, or even connecting over a television set. And finally, if retail channels have new roles, then we need to use new KPIs, new performance measures to benchmark performance. The example I gave of the Apple store a moment ago, if stores are more about demonstrating products and educating about the brand rather than retail, then measuring experience and brand sentiment from a retail visit are perhaps more important than footfall and sales. So I'd like to finish my presentation today just by giving a few case studies and examples, just to illustrate my point about this multi-channel approach. Social media is something we hear about a lot and is being talked about a lot today. And certainly when we're talking about the digital consumer, social media is very important in terms of influencing. We've heard in presentations from Mark Earls and perhaps to some extent John Kieran's as well about the influence of emotion and peer pressure. Using social media to understand the impact of retail and promotions in the physical world, in the online world, can be really important. But what we also need to do is to ensure that we ask the so what and then link this to behavior back in the real world. The example word I show you here was understanding the impact of a physical product giveaway for Twinings, a tea brand, during the recent royal wedding here in the UK, where we were able to show a direct connection between the location of the actual promotion itself with the product, the event, and the brand. But that's just the first piece of the puzzle. And really, when we get to understanding the full shopper journey, this is where we need to take this multi-channel approach. And just briefly, the overview here is, as I said, there's no one-size-fits-all. This is merely an outline. If we want to follow the entire shopper journey, it could be a case of using in-home depth interviews or ethnography to understand the consumer and the consumer context of a purchase. It could be about using online shopper blogs and allowing the consumer to take us on their journey and tell us their full tale at every step and every channel. Rather than accompanied shops, we like to do something we call shopper safaris, and this is following the consumer where they go. And this comes back to my point about the research following the consumer, not forcing the consumer to follow the research in single event, single channel approaches. Using the mobile device, the digital shopper is clearly using the mobile phone as a research tool and a purchase tool. So why not use it to do consumer research with them as well? Getting people to keep shopper diaries is an excellent way of understanding behavior in context in terms of the location in store, but also in context of the device. And of course, as we've seen and we will see from other presentations talking about mobile research, the multimedia power of these devices in terms of bringing the journey to life is very, very powerful. But then also using things like bulletin boards or perhaps to some extent even communities post-purchase journey to reflect on behavior and co-create and generate ideas for improvements. A brief example just to illustrate a point here, a study that we did looking at mobile payments, so paying for products in store using a mobile phone, where we used depth interviews, mobile-based shopper diaries, but also online bulletin boards. We got the consumers to keep a diary every time they visited a store over the period of the study and tell us what store they were in, what they were purchasing, how much they spent, the means of payment they used, and also how accessible their mobile phone was at that point in time. And analysing and putting together all this input and feeding that into the bulletin board discussions, we're able to develop use cases and use case scenarios for mobile payments. As you can see from this slide, one of the things that we took out of this was, while mobile payments does meet some of the requirements of cash in terms of low-value impulse purchase, and debit and credit cards as being that always with us, always accessible, portable payment, it's not a direct placement for either. It will find its place, but it will find its place alongside existing methods. And for me, this really illustrates the point I'm trying to make here about researching the digital shopper. Digital research and mobile research in particular has its place, but it doesn't replace everything overnight. That said, I am a big fan of mobilizing research, and when you want to understand the mobile aspect of multi-channel behavior, then surely interacting with respondents using that device is the way to go. Working with Curiously, who had this great in-app polling system, we managed to engage with smartphone owners to understand the use of the device and the internet at the point of purchase. As you can see from some of the findings here, and it really reinforces the percentages we see at the beginning of my presentation. While it's very small at the moment in terms of the proportion of consumers worldwide who are using the mobile as a purchase tool, the opportunity is huge. These devices are growing in terms of incidence. They're always with us, and more retailers and brands are providing the tools we need to engage with them, to browse a purchase, to make a purchase and pay for it. So while this behavior is only going to increase, the place for mobile research in understanding shopper behavior will surely grow too. My last example is one that illustrates the point that traditional methods are still key, and traditional methods to understand new digital behavior just as much. In this example, we used good old depth interviews and an online survey to understand consumers' perceptions and fears and use of QR codes. QR codes, if you're not familiar, are the two-dimensional black and white blob you can see in the middle of this slide that brands are increasingly using on product packaging and advertising for consumers to scan with a smartphone to take them to content of some sort. But while we talked to the same consumers about using the same digital tool through the same channel, the way they wanted to use that tool differed widely by category. When we're talking about low-value repeat purchases like grocery shopping, it was about adding value, collecting coupons, getting money off, entering competitions. But when we look at more engaged, higher-ticket purchases like domestic appliances and consumer electronics, it's a lot more about peace of mind, getting those peer-to-peer reviews, getting price comparisons, getting product information. So we need to think very carefully about the consumers we're researching, the categories we're trying to understand, and the behavior we're trying to follow when we decide what tools to pick out of our kit and how to apply them and how to stitch them together. And that's really the message I want to leave with you today, that much as retailers are having to develop cohesive, smooth, multi-channel experiences that allow consumers to go from online to offline world, we too as researchers need to offer that same solution to truly understand this behavior.